You're listening to a lifestyle podcast with Lovoni and Sarah. Our goals: to inspire good health and well-being, empowerment, beauty and joy, offering support and friendship as we share our journeys in the hopes it helps you. Hello my friends, and thanks for tuning in to what was once the Waiting Room podcast. I'm Lovoni, and together with my co-host Sarah, we want to let you know our podcast has changed its name from the Waiting Room podcast to simply Lovoni and Sarah. Now, along with the name change, we're doing some rebranding and developing a website, all very exciting, and we'd love you to come along on this adventure with us.
The Waiting Room podcast is a no-nonsense approach to losing weight and feeling better, peppered with helpful lifestyle tips and cooking inspiration. Join me, Sarah Holton,
and me, Lovoni Walker, as we talk frankly about the overall health implications of being overweight, what we're doing to get healthy, and our journeys to hopefully inspire others to do the same, using a simplistic approach to eating thoughtfully and living abundantly. Welcome to episode 4 of the Waiting Room podcast. Today we're talking about the emotional side of being overweight. Just imagine that you never have to think about being overweight again, that it's intuitively to know that food was your friend, your body felt strong and healthy, and you felt good in your body. But why do we gain weight in the first place? How do we recognize the emotional baggage we're carrying around with us? And then how do we deal with the emotional blockers that keep us hanging on to the weight? But before we get into it, I thought we'd just have a little catch up and share where Sarah and I are in the world. Sarah, you want to tell us? I'm very jealous where Sarah lives. It's where I want to live.
Sure. So I am. I'm in Malmesbury, Wiltshire, which is on the edge of the Cotswolds. We have just come out of a 3-week solid rain period, so very grateful that we are now experiencing very cold, so -2 in the mornings, obviously much colder overnight, but very bright sunny period. So I'm coming to you from sunny Malmesbury today.
And I'm coming to you from the not so sunny Indiana. I live on the outskirts of a very small town in America's Midwest, about an hour north of Indianapolis, which is the capital of Indiana. So there's nothing much around me, and we get some pretty harsh winters here, but I don't know, at the moment it's just raining, so I don't mind that. I guess take that over snow. It's a bit easier to drive if you're going anywhere. But we should also, I guess, chat about last week's goals. Sarah, do you remember what yours were?
Yeah, mine. The original goal for me was to sort of move more and do some more exercise without it being a strict exercise format. I'm still doing really well with that. I'm really focusing on my physio at the moment, so that's great. And last week's goal was to eat more mindfully. I've had a mixed week. I'm going to be completely honest about this. I'm not going to wallpaper over the cracks. The beginning, or sort of last week, I went to a close friend's family funeral and her grandmother, and when I was there, I was surrounded by cake and scones and finger sandwiches, fully intended to come home and have an evening meal and not have any. And I had just a few, and then it just went down the slippery slope. So what started as one afternoon soon turned into about 3 days of making really poor choices. I'm eating loads. Let's just not try and pretend I didn't. I ate so much. But from Saturday onwards, I then got control of that again. So I did eat more mindfully. I have made my choices. I've made my plan for the day. So I've got no weight loss to report for this week, but no gain either, which is good because it has to have gone up to have come back down again. There's no way I could have eaten like that at the beginning of the week. So mixed, really, a mixed week for me, but I definitely managed to get hold of it sort of part the way through the week and didn't write myself off completely. It was definitely a few days of overload in sugar and carbs and all the stuff that's just not going to help me. But I'm back on a more mindful eating track now. What about you?
Mine was to have smaller portion sizes, which I didn't necessarily do, although I did lose 1.3 kilos, which is, a bit over 2 pounds. But I think that was
Yeah,
because of exercising that happened. But it wasn't so much that my portions were big, but I'm testing a Mexican cookbook at the moment, and so I have to try what the recipes that I'm testing,
yeah,
and um, and then I fill out a form and write comments about the taste and da da da, right? Whether the recipe worked or not. And as I sit and do that, I try the food. Now, really, I just need one bite to
yeah.
to do it. But greedy me just sits there and shovels, especially if it's yummy, because not all of them are the recipes. But just mindlessly, like you were saying, mindless. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Um, eating this, then I still have my meals as well. So that's probably
That must
where,
be really hard. So if you've got your, calorie sort of allocation for the day, whatever you decide that might be, and I'm not sticking to this within the last calorie, but I'm using it as a guide so I know what I'm eating, and the hidden calories and things. But that must be really difficult if you've decided for the day roughly what you're going to eat, and then you've almost got all this extra meals on top to then
yeah, well, it
not
is
do that.
because if I'm either testing recipes or developing recipes, and that involves, of course, trying things. But I have to say, like one taste really, maybe
Yeah.
two at the most. Of just, I mean, I don't have to have like great big spoonfuls, but so that's
So what you going
something that I
so what
really
are you
can
going to do
focus on.
then? What are you going to do to make that not happen?
I'm just going to not do it. There you go.
That's slightly easier than said than done,
And I have
surely.
21 of them to get done in the next few days. So stay tuned for that one. But
Okay,
I'm
good
making
luck.
tortillas and like from scratch, like corn ones, flour ones, etc. So I really just need to tear off a little section, and
Yeah.
and I can tell, you can tell whether something's turned out. If it's a sauce,
Yeah.
that's different. But for bread, you can tell. You don't necessarily have to taste it. So I just have to have a little
Not do it.
self-control.
Yeah.
Yes. And then not think why, God, which is, this is good leading into this. The whole why am I doing this thing, just
Yeah.
mindless, and how that ties into the whole emotional overeating. Because I think if somebody wants to lose weight, get healthy, until they've dealt with the emotional shit that they've got going on in their life in some
Yeah.
capacity. It doesn't mean they're going to have, a clean slate, but unless they they recognize that there's something there and are mindful of that, then it's just going to be just, a merry-go-round. It's just going to keep going
Yeah.
round and round and round. They can go on any diet, and unless they've dealt with the reason why they overeat, then it's just going to keep happening.
Do you think you're better at that now than you used to be? I know within myself, I'm very aware now of why, at least it is the kickoff, why I'm overeating. It might then roll into a few days, and as the days come, you just become a little bit less in tune with that. But I certainly know that first, sometimes actually. So last week, there was no emotional reason why I was eating that. It was just there, and I just couldn't resist it. And once I'd started, because I'm still trying to battle at the moment of getting back into a controlled state, I just lost it, and I was like, oh my God, I love this. And it was like an addiction. It was just
Right,
taking me over.
right.
But that's quite different to other times for me when I'm overeating. At other times, I know I'm doing it and why I'm doing it, and it's just that choice about whether I can take control of that or not. But is that the same for you, or have you always been aware of why you're doing it?
I used to say that I didn't like I didn't, my emotions didn't govern. I wasn't like an emotional eater. That's what I'm trying to say. I used to
Right.
always say that, but I can't say that anymore. Do you think, listening to you say that, about what happened, and you can't think there wasn't like any one particular thing,
Yeah.
but, and yes, you're aware of it, but do you think sometimes that sort of, well, it was kind of binge eating, really, wasn't it?
It was.
That
Yeah, it
that
was.
happens because we deprive ourselves, and just the way of looking at food, like thinking, oh, this is naughty stuff that I shouldn't eat, and so
I
therefore you
think
just
for
want to eat
me,
it.
it's more historical than that. So, um, I was always overweight from a very young child, and I can talk about that in a minute. I now know why that happened, because my mum or my family told me when that actually started, because when I was up until about the age of 3, I was a very tiny, petite young little girl, and I've got very small bone structure, so I really didn't need much at all. And at one point, my mum couldn't get me to eat much at all. But there was a sort of a turning point for that. But then as I moved to my teenage years, well, then I just got worse and worse. I got bigger and bigger. But my late teens, I got to the point where I think now, if it was happening to me, we would probably say I had a sort of an eating disorder. But 30 years ago, it wasn't so
recognized,
discussed. It was if you were anorexic, so if you
right,
weren't really, really thin. But if you were overweight, you were just classed as someone that was greedy,
right, or lazy or
so,
something. Yeah,
exactly. There wasn't the sort of discussion around the other end of the spectrum.
Right.
I most definitely was at the other end of the spectrum, and I was basically, if I boiled it right down, I was depressed.
Right.
I was depressed because I was overweight, but then it became a self-fulfilling prophecy because I was even more overweight because I kept eating more. But the way that I was eating was even more extreme than binge eating. So I would eat foods whole because I didn't like the taste of them, and I had to keep going until I basically felt this sensation where I was overwhelmed. And at that point, I'd either go make myself ill or just try and lay down on a cold floor until that feeling passed, because it's horrible. I mean, you really do feel like completely almost poisoned by too much food in your system. And then as soon as that feeling passed, I would start again. So it was almost a craving of that feeling that I needed. I needed to feel so full and so awful that I didn't think about anything else, if that makes sense.
Was it like a form of punishment, do you think?
No, it was a distraction, I think. I think it was almost like all I could feel or think when I felt that full and sick was feel full and sick. I couldn't feel horrible about myself. Clearly, I very quickly did afterwards, because then that wave of dislike of yourself then kicks in.
Yeah.
But in that moment, I didn't feel lonely. I didn't feel depressed, upset, ashamed. Just in that split moment,
consumed by how you felt.
Yeah, because I felt so ill.
Yeah.
But then it waves off, and of course, then the wave of all of that self-hate kicks in, and then I started again. But I mean, I literally can remember standing there with an open fridge door, seeing like a wheel of Stilton, for example, which I hated back in the sort of that age, and eating massive clumpfuls of this cheese and just swallowing it down whole. I mean, that is not standard behavior with regards to food.
Right.
That's not binge eating. That's to another level. And clearly, I had a problem. I wasn't very well, and my weight just ballooned and ballooned and ballooned until I wasn't just an overweight young girl anymore. I was extremely obese. And then I can remember a time that I did go on a programmed diet, and I lost the weight and I felt so much better. And since then, I've always been an up and down, but not gone to that extreme with my relationship with food. But what I was going to say was, when I then go into like a binge eating situation now, which does still happen, particularly with sugary food, once I've started, if I'm not in a controlled state of mind, it can just take me away. I think I'm instantly taken back to that moment of feeling like that when I was younger.
Right.
Not knowingly so, but taken back to the point of feeling I don't have to think anything. It's just mindlessly going to go in. So that mindless feeling is exactly the same as it was then, without going to the extreme of feeling so ill that I have to go and be sick or lay down. Thankfully, because it's just awful. So I think for me, that's where it's the foundations of it all are. But it's then as an adult becoming more aware of that and how I deal with it. But you're right, it is binge eating in those few days, but I don't do it necessarily now in a sort of in an emotional situation. It's just something that I seem to slip into. It's like something inside me that's just sort of says, oh, I know this feeling, this is what you do.
Right. So it's like a place that a familiar place.
Familiarity.
Yeah,
exactly. And not a good one, but that's what it is. And it's just, my experience of that is, I'm not inside my own body. I don't feel like I'm inside looking through my eyes. I'm almost just completely disconnected from the rest of the world around me.
Right.
I'm not sort of connected with anything. I'm almost trying to be in a little blinker, and it just shoves in. Like secret eating and all that sort of stuff.
is it ever, like, do you ever look and think, oh, what's happening in my life at the moment that's making, does
I
that,
do have moments. So I think I'm as an adult now, and definitely within the last few years, I'm much more aware that sometimes, and I'm like, oh, look at that, that's just happened. Something which is a trigger, which is difficult, whether it's confrontation, whether it's sadness, whether it's
anxiety?
something, yeah, something like that, which is a trigger. The first thing that my body wants to do is stand up and go and find something to eat.
Right, right.
That's a little bit different, and I think that's a comfort and a sort of a
Safe.
panic.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. For me, it's like a
Well,
safe place. It's a
I
secure
think it,
place, That's the
yeah, I
one
think it probably is when I'm
constant.
eating it. Exactly. But I
Right,
think at the moment it's a panic. And I'm like, instead of dealing with the situation of what's in front of me, whether it's anxious, sad, confrontational, I don't have to think about it if I'm going to go and eat.
right.
Do you know what I mean? It's like it's almost a distraction technique.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is where my overeating generally on an everyday basis happens now. So I'm like, oh, and I just stand up and I go, and I now know it, and I'm good at controlling it. I'm like, no. So I try and get myself a drink or something else, like water,
Right.
or even a diet soda or something like that, and Diet Coke instead. Um, so that's the bit that I do know about, and that's the bit that I can manage, and I'm a lot more aware of it. So that is an emotional trigger, but it's not an upset emotional trigger. It's more of a difficult, something difficult, and I avoid it by going to eat something.
Right.
And that becomes easier because I work at home.
Yes.
So, it's so flipping easy
There's no eyes on you.
No,
I mean, if
but
you were
then even if
surrounded
there
by,
were,
you'd still do it?
well, I don't know. That's what I was about to say. If there were and you don't do it, then that's secret eating. So that's another thing as well, isn't it? Because
Right.
actually, if you're doing this to sort of satisfy yourself, why don't you do it in front of other people?
Yeah.
And the reason you don't is because you're shamed, because you know that you shouldn't be doing it.
Right,
Because of,
right.
it's gluttonous. It's people are going to judge you.
Yeah.
You know what you're doing, so you're embodying, you're ashamed of it.
Right.
So that's the reason you don't do it in front of other people.
Mm-hmm.
However, people can see the result of what's happened if you do it. They can see that you're overweight. So it's sort of ridiculous that you won't do the process in front of them.
Right,
They
right.
can see the end
Yeah.
result. So that's another whole thing to talk about, separately. I think it's public shame, isn't it, about why you don't do it in front of people.
Right.
But so me, I've got those triggers. I've got the triggers that are avoidance. I've got this pattern that I just slip into, and I find it's basically sugary foods, but any of that overeating, once I've started, I find it really hard to sort of, when I'm not in a controlled place, to then stop. And I think that sugar connection comes from, so apparently my mum told me that when I was 4, we moved location in the UK where we were living, and we had to move to somewhere that really wasn't that great for a period of time, not that long, sort of 6 to 12 months, I think. Could be wrong, but and we had to walk up a huge hill every day, and it was like, to get me anywhere, Mum just said it was a bit miserable, to be quite honest. They didn't like the home and all that sort of thing. She had my young sister to sort of look after as well, so I was probably a little bit like, oh, hang on, just wait there a minute. And what she did is she gave me chocolate.
Oh, okay.
And so to make things okay, she gave me sweets and chocolate.
Right.
And and I then she said, I was really tiny up until that point, and then I just ballooned. And so probably deep down, all the way underneath there, that connection with sugar has been that whole have it to make everything okay type of scenario. And there was no sort of filtering, just have a little bit as a treat. It was a comfort and almost a sort of push aside having to deal with anything because everything was so horrible. So it's a substitute.
Right.
So that's when my weight journey really happened. And so from the age of 4, I've been overweight. I've not had a great relationship with food, and not had the skills just to know that it's okay just to have a little bit and then you leave it,
right,
or to treat it as a treat. So when you think, over 40 years worth of programming of your body,
right,
that's not going to get undone in
overnight, no,
in a short period of time, is it?
No.
But I think for me, I've reached an acceptance of, okay, I know what I was like in my teenage years, and I had a really bad issue with food. It was really unhealthy, mentally unhealthy. I had, right from a young age, the relationship with food that was just given to try and sort of make everything okay and substitute a life that didn't feel that nice for us. So to sort of just sit with that and go, okay, I know all of that, I can't change it, but what I can do is try and recognize these things now. And even if they do happen, I think I'm recognizing myself, it's likely that I will always have a bit of an up down relationship with food for my life, because that's, it's been part of my programming. But that's okay if I've learned how to
recognize,
take back control, recognize it, nip it in the bud, deal with it, not give myself a hard time about it too much, because obviously then you double on that, don't you? You double down on it. And try to lean on something else for that reassurance and comfort and distraction, rather than it being sugary food. And I think, the trick to that will be to have alternatives to turn to instead.
And just doing it,
Yes.
And then over time, it will get easier.
Your pattern will change.
The pattern will change and become routine, which is what we're going to be chatting about next week. See, my mum was the complete opposite. If we got a treat, she'd hold her hands behind her back and say, which hand do you want? And in one hand would be a carrot, and the other hand would be one of those little boxes of sultanas. And so we weren't allowed to eat, cookies and cake. We could have birthday cake. She would bake, and my nan would bake, and I liked to cook. So if it was homemade, it wasn't so bad. But, and I, could just eat 2 cookies, and that was biscuits, and that was fine. But, Mum was the complete opposite. One of our neighbours who we're still friends with, she used to feel sorry for me, and every now and then she'd give me a cookie. But it was more like, this is naughty food and this is good food. When really it's all in moderation too.
Yeah, exactly.
But my issue really, once it happened in Australia when I was married to my first husband, who was abusive, like verbally abusive, and I put on weight then, and I think that was my little safety thing that I put around me, because when I decided I'm done, he was like an abusive alcoholic drug addict, and I thought I could fix him. He had a lot of issues himself. At his core, he had a kind heart, but he had so many issues and was just fucked up from stuff that had happened to him as a child, that that's how it came out as an adult, because he'd never spoken to anybody about it or dealt with it. And so when I was with him, I built this wall around me with food as the buffer. When he and I divorced, it just all fell off me again. But then when I moved to North America, I first moved from Sydney to Canada, that's when I started to put it on. And, I just ate, but the food was a bit different. We'd eat out, my Canadian partner and I would eat out quite a bit. And, a lot of it was deep fried, whereas I had very little deep fried unless I had a spring roll at a Chinese restaurant or something every once in a while. But, and then each year it got worse and worse.
Right.
And his family weren't particularly nice, and he and I, were okay, but we did split up after being together for 10 years, and I moved to the US and I was by myself, and then I lost weight again. Then. And then, I met my husband, now my American husband, and then, once again, I put weight back on. Every time we moved, because I've lived in several states here and in different houses within in the States. So it's like every time we moved, I'd put on a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. This place that we bought here in Indiana, this is probably the longest I've lived anywhere since moving to North America. But as I said before, I never thought that I was an emotional eater.
Yeah.
It's been only really in the last 12 months that I've come to realize that, you are. And I'm
Yeah.
like a very A-type personality too, so I can't stand things being out of order. I like, you know, I like to be organized. I get anxious. I
Hmm.
hide that quite well, but I don't might not outwardly seem like I am,
Yeah.
but inwardly, like right now, there's all sorts of things going on, and inwardly, it's like, oh God, I can't stand it because everything isn't where it's meant to be, and it's a bit, I don't know, OCD, I guess.
Yeah.
But I know anxiety is a big thing for people. My mom, when she passed away last year, when my sister called to tell me, and it was between my husband coming home from work and me, having the conversation with my sister that mama died, and I was standing in the kitchen just eating, just standing there eating, and I stopped myself and thought, it was a reaction to finding out
Yeah.
about mum's death. But then on the other hand, 3 months later, when our father died, that was a sudden thing. Mum's was like a slow decline with
Yeah.
dementia. My father was it seemed sudden. Talking to him one moment and the next he's gone, and I couldn't eat then. I just felt sick. I felt like
No.
somebody had just punched me in the guts, and coming to terms with that right now, I think that I've turned to food a little bit again,
Hmm.
as like my comfort. It's the
Yeah.
one constant, when life is just crashing down around you. It's been the one constant, but at the same time, it's also the one thing that I can control. And
But
go
is
on.
it food or is it the type of food? So now, for example, the comfort eating that you're doing, is it the process of actually eating or is it the type of food that you're eating?
Well, see, I can't have stuff like I can't go and buy a chocolate bar and think, oh, I'll just have a square of a night. That's
No.
just the whole thing is gone.
Yeah.
So I don't keep a lot of stuff in the house. But having said that, because I cook for a living, if I feel like something, I can whip it up in a
Yeah,
nanosecond.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, so
That's
yeah,
what I
I
mean.
don't know. I
Do
don't
you think it
see.
is eating? Are you, because you're not, I presume you're not sitting there eating like a massive bowl of chopped up sort of carrot sticks or anything.
Right,
So
no.
it's not eating. That's what I challenge myself on. It's not
Right.
actually eating, is it? Because if it was eating and someone put out in front of you, I don't know, celery, carrots, pears, and you go, yeah, I'm okay. Because that's
If there
not
was a
what you
good
want.
dip with it, that would be all right.
Well, yes,
A
exactly. But
nice
it's
creamy
but
dip.
but that's it's the hit that you get, isn't it, from the
Right.
type of food that you're putting. So whether it is creamy, whether it is sugary, whether it is stodgy sort of carbs, bread or potatoes or something, that's the weird thing, isn't it? Because the emotional comfort isn't coming from the process of
It's
actually
not coming
chewing
from
or eating.
lettuce.
No.
No.
And so that's more for us to dive into as well, I think, because
Right.
actually it's the physical chemical reaction that's happening in your body when those foods that you're craving go in compared to the process of actually chewing and swallowing. Because it's not
Right.
food's fault, is it? It's the type of food and how
Right.
much of it that we're eating.
Right. Because if you sit down and eat a bowl of pasta, right,
Yeah,
and you sit down and you eat a bowl of salad, that the salad takes, like you were saying, with the chewing and everything, I guess
yeah,
it's more mindful because it takes longer to eat because you've got to
yeah.
chew all that stuff up. Whereas with pasta, couple of
Just goes
chews,
down.
down it goes.
But there's something
So,
very comforting about the chewing of something which is a little bit soft and a little bit sort of squidgy,
yeah.
whereas if you were going to chew on a carrot, it doesn't provide the
Which is
comfort.
so
So,
weird for me because I love crispy things. Like
right,
schnitzel and stuff like that. Anything
yeah,
crunchy. I'm into crunch.
right,
But
okay,
I mean, I like, I love potatoes and mashed potatoes and stuff like that. But I do love crunchy things. But
yeah,
often for me, it's I just like, if I like the taste of something, it's like stop eating it, like
yeah,
it's that kind of thing. And it's because I'm enjoying it. Like if I've got a cheese plate in
mm,
front of me, if I don't like the cheese, if it's just cheap cheese,
Yeah.
then chances are I'm probably not going to eat it unless I get that cheese, caramelize some onions, pop it in some bread and
Yeah.
make like a toasty or something with it. Then that's a whole different thing. But yeah, I don't know. I'm learning to recognize that there's shit that I need to deal with, and I think this goes with
Yeah.
many people. Like deal with it and then put it behind me and get on with it. That causes these things, and just to be aware of them, and like you said, finding something else to do. Using that, because we are in control. You feel out of control, but it is the one thing we can control. You can't control.
Yeah, you don't
a
have
lot
to
in
put it in your
life.
mouth and eat it. You just
No.
don't have to do that.
No.
And I'm second guessing that every human being must have the ability to do this, because there's phrases for everybody. Eyes are bigger than your belly and all that sort of stuff. It must be a pretty standard approach. It's just whether people have that self-control to say, I'm not going to overdo it. But for some reason, that's been undone in some people, whether it is programming from a young age, or whether something is a trigger that happens now, or maybe it's just a natural. Some people are more greedy than others. Everyone's different, but they must have an element of it somewhere. And I think the nub of it is controlling those urges. So I don't think personally I'll ever be able to get rid of the urges. It's just, what do I do with them?
We were talking yesterday about how you were saying, I wonder whether you can ever get to that stage where you don't have to be consumed by the thought of food, or how am I going to handle this, or worrying about binge eating, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking a lot about that since our conversation, and there's a lot of like any sort of self-help thing it's almost like fake it till you make it type thing.
Yeah.
You know how Mel Robbins talks about that whole high five thing to yourself, which sounds ridiculous, but apparently it triggers something in your brain.
Yeah.
It's almost, and this is something I'm going to try, and I'll try it within the next week. I know just 1 week won't do it, but I'm just going to try this and see how I go. Is one, try to not think of food as bad or good. And, okay, processed food with lots of chemicals in it, we'd want to try and stay away from that as much as possible. But not thinking like a piece of cake at somebody's birthday is a bad thing, or it's naughty, or it's forbidden, because if something's forbidden, then you want it, right?
Exactly.
So that, and then the whole, like I said, the fake it till you make it thing. I'm just going to try and have that mindset of like, how would someone that doesn't have these issues, that isn't dealing with being overweight, how would they think if they were eating? They just eat. I'm hungry.
And
I'm going to make myself
I think you're
some
right.
lunch.
And I think it's not even trying to think about it. It's being it.
It's being it. Exactly.
And I've done that before, and it does work. Is, when you're presented with options, I just say to myself, oh, but I don't eat that. It's because actually, on a general basis, someone that is not overweight, they won't eat a whole family bar of chocolate in one go. They just won't, or less often than I would. So it's, if you're presented the way that I then go, but I don't do that. Because actually, if you believe in yourself that you have the ability, and you're probably going to then for the next 3 days binge eat and all that sort of thing, you probably will deliver that, because that's what you think about yourself. If you try and change your own thought about yourself, so my own thought in that moment says, I don't do that, I don't eat all of that food, so, and then I can turn on my heel and walk away. Now, and I've spoken before, when I'm in a controlled state and not, but when I'm in a controlled state, I can have chocolate in the house, and I can just eat sort of 3 pieces or 6 little tiny nuggets of it, and it can stay there. But I have to go through the hard work first before I get to that stage. And when I'm in that stage, I'm planned, I'm controlled, I'm a lot healthier, everything all falls into place. It's because I'm exercising more. It's because I'm drinking a lot more fluid better. I'm, making my food choices better. And then all of a sudden, it doesn't overwhelm me, the fact that it's sat there. Right here and now, I would really, really struggle, particularly because last week I did have that binge period, to know there was a whole bag of like 12 bites or something in my fridge.
Right.
I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna have to go in. And then once you've had 3, I'd have the whole pack, and then that would be
I've
done.
done it now.
And then the emotional, that's the thing afterwards, isn't it? It's the emotional
The guilt.
situation of what happens. Oh yeah, after you've done
you
it.
beat yourself
and
up.
then normally 9 times out of 10 is like, okay, I've done it now, so I might as well go and eat whatever else I can find.
Yeah.
And so then you go and find all of the other food that you've got in the house, because you've undone what you're supposed to have done, and oh well, I'll start again tomorrow. You've said before, it has to start now.
Right then. You just need to nip it in the bud.
Even if I have eaten a family-sized bag of 12 bites.
Right.
A lot of other people do that as well. People that are not overweight do that as well. People have days where they just go, oh, I've eaten 3 chocolate bars today or whatever. It's just to say, but stop. That doesn't mean I now eat 4 slices of toast, whatever else I can find, and then go into this massive binge overwhelm. That's the difference, isn't it? And I think that's where the emotional side of not what's happened before, but what's going to happen now, that's what we need to get us under control better.
Because I keep thinking, when I lose the weight, then somehow I will develop this better relationship with food. And I think, no, that has to start right now. Somehow or another, that has to start now. Whether, like I said, it's like the fake it till you make it thing. Because if I wait a year, then I'm constantly going to be doing this back and forth, and it's just, God, it's overwhelming, just all that battling in your head.
Do you think that feeds into things that we've said before about being kind of all or nothing? So when you're on a diet plan, like we spoke about last time, you kind of want instant results,
right?
Or you want to see something straight away. So it's almost a case of, oh, well, if I don't eat that chocolate now, I know overall it will help me, but you know what, by tomorrow it won't really make much difference, so stuff it. I'll just have it now, and then later on then
it's gone. You don't have to think about it.
Yeah, you've got to make those choices now for the overall picture, which is really not easy, because you don't see an instant result for that, do you? You don't get any benefit by instantly not eating that chocolate.
No.
It's not like you're going to walk out tomorrow and suddenly be that you look thinner.
Right.
But what you have to do is, for the greater good, for the overall project, is not eat that.
Right.
But that's a really big ask. It's like those, you've seen them, the little kids are sat in a room and you put a little sweetie in front of them and tell them don't eat it, and then they leave the room and say, if you don't eat it, we'll give you a big present later.
Right.
And then they film them and they're sitting there going, oh, because they can see it, like, this sweet in front of them.
Right.
And the cutest ones is when there's 2 of them. Because often there's one that says, no, don't eat it, because we're going to get something really good later. And there's the other one going, stuff that, I'm having it.
That'd be me.
And in it
that
goes.
Would be me.
And then guess what? The first one that did have resolve just looks at the other and goes, oh, okay. And then eats it as well, because they follow the crowd. And that shows that it's a natural thing inbuilt in some people as well. There's some people that are built, that are able to last for the bigger reward.
Right.
And there's those that need the instant gratification of having something now. So I think you have to give yourself a little bit of leeway to say we're all different, and we're either, made like this or that. So some people probably do have to battle, people like me, battle a bit harder at making those decisions, because it is a decision, a controlled decision, not to have that instant gratification of eating that chocolate now, so that my present to myself later on will be that I've managed to improve my health, lose weight, and feel better. But my God, is that a big ask?
Right, because it's a future present. It's not a right now.
And you're looking at it, you're going, yeah, but I know how delicious that chocolate is. And I just, and it is an addiction, overwhelms you. Like, I've just got to have it. And you can feel like it really building up. So that's why I'm trying to then swap it for something different, because that's what works for me. So I tend not to drink much Diet Coke, to be quite honest, but I do have some cans around, so that in the fridge, so that if that overwhelming situation where I am desperate, because it does feel desperate, doesn't it? It's not the case. Well, it does for me. It's not just like, oh, I fancy that. Absolutely, you feel like you stab someone for it in the hand, but it's to then swap it out for something else, and that's the trick, is trying not to, try and shut it off too much by just going and distract myself. Okay, have something else instead. But that said, I will still go to a birthday party and have some cake. I'm not going to be the person that says no, because I've got to live my life as well, and it's really delicious and I enjoy it. But it's just, and that's what people do that are healthy. Like, as you say, take it to make it. They will go and they'll eat some.
Right. And then they won't beat themselves up over it, or they might, walk an extra mile or whatever.
Do some extra exercise.
Do something like that. Yeah. But not to have it consume you. See, that I find it consumes me, the whole my relationship with food, which is why I think there has to be some self-control. If anybody wants to lose weight and get healthier, they have to have self-control, whether they're dealing with the emotions or, whatever, that has to play into it. And I think that the more you tell yourself you're a certain way, like, oh, you're greedy, oh, you have no self-control, you believe it. And then that's a cop-out. It's like, well, I'm doing this because I'm greedy and I have no self-control. I kind of joke about that. But if you say to yourself, even though you may not believe it initially, that you do have self-control, I've got this, I'm not greedy, I'm just going to have a piece, and then somehow just shut it out that you've done that, and then just keep on with, your day or whatever it was you were doing, but don't just stand in the kitchen eating it. I was saying yesterday, I'm going to make some ginger and chocolate biscotti just to have as a, snack with a coffee mid-morning, a piece. But to sit down and enjoy it, maybe with a book or something like that. Yeah. Sit down and enjoy it, not just stand there at the kitchen counter shoveling them in my face. Yeah. So, and
secret eating again, you wouldn't do that if you were out in a coffee shop. It just wouldn't happen, would it?
No. So that's going to be my little sort of test. Because I thought, I don't always like a big breakfast. I did make myself one this morning, but just to have, like some fruit and then something like that. People say, oh, you need protein. But I make up for that in the day. But anyway, everybody's different. So, I'm just going to do that and use a bit of reverse psychology until I believe it. I don't know. I'm going to try that. I think
there's also just thinking through more recently when I've been a lot more overweight than I am now, because I have lost a lot of weight compared to I was a few years ago. And that's because I got myself into a situation where I wasn't happy. But what then happens then is I disliked myself so much, or I did dislike myself, but I didn't care enough about myself to then do something about it. And so then it just grows, doesn't it? It's not that you just plateau. You must keep going because you keep gaining weight. It's not like you just suddenly say, well, I've stayed the same. And it was just unhappiness and a disregard for myself that then found me in that situation. And I knew consciously that I was doing it. I couldn't even wake up and go, oh, how did I suddenly become 3 stone heavier? It's because I was eating, a pint pot of ice cream, or the takeaways that we were getting were so large that they'd been enough for me and someone else. But you would just mindlessly eat it. No, but then the guilt and the dislike of yourself, because you think, I really, really didn't need to do that. But you know what, I've done it now. Oh, well, that's it. Might as well carry on. And it just grows and grows and grows, and every item of clothing you put on, you just think you hate how you look, and it just really snowballs in the wrong direction, doesn't it? Yeah. But the moment you can just stop, and then start to, even small steps, go the other way, it's quite amazing how you can start thinking differently about yourself and moving it back the other way. So that's the diff. So yes, it is living like other people that are, that are not overweight live, but I think it's almost living in that version of you that that you can get to, that you don't want to be. So it's just like stopping your own self, isn't it? So if I'm living this way, even if it seems a bit much to try and live like someone else is doing right now, just even do what I know in my heart of hearts is right for me in that moment. And that's still a difficult decision, but
Right. Like treat
maybe a bit.
yourself like you would a good friend. You want
Yeah,
to,
yeah,
nourish them and be kind to them. And, whereas we don't do that to ourselves, we beat ourselves
no,
up for pretty much everything. I know I have done my whole life. When I was little, I used to leave notes for my mom saying, apologizing for things that I couldn't help. Like my mom had crooked little fingers, and
right,
mine are like that too. And I would apologize for that. I'd write a little note, and
really,
all these things that I perceived physically wrong with me, I
yeah,
would say, I'm sorry that I bite my nails, or I'm sorry that I said a bad word or something like that, God
no,
forbid. But just things like, I'm sorry that my feet are too big or something, because I was teased about that from one of my cousins. But Mum never ever said anything to me about that, which I only thought of that this morning, and I thought, how peculiar that she never did
hmm,
that. And I was, telling my sister about this recently, and Mum had never said anything to her about it, and she didn't keep them. She threw them away because she kept everything, and my sister and I had to go through all her stuff a couple of years back.
yeah,
But I wonder where that stemmed from. I thought, I was talking to someone, this is a few years back, about, the whole overeating. She's an allergist, this lady, but she deals with, with a lot of overweight people that come to her, but she eliminates foods from their diet, to help them. But I said to her, when I was 6, my dad left Mum, was just before Christmas, with two girls to raise, and off he went, and I didn't see him again till I was 15. And how much of that, it was never spoken of. His
mm,
name was never spoken of at home until I was older. It was really until I was about 17, 18 that we talked about him. And I think it was more Mum felt she was protecting me. But I
mm,
think, how much has that played into my psyche? Because
yeah,
then, Mum remarried John, who I refer to as my father, and I dearly loved him, but he had issues, and he and I had a tumultuous relationship, and he would drink, and he'd come home and be belligerent and, fight with my mom, and I didn't ever talk to anybody about that.
no,
And I think, how much of that stuff that people go through in their childhood plays into how they then are as an adult.
oh,
I
for
mean,
sure,
back
yeah,
then I guess I didn't binge eat because I was under the watchful eye of my mom, who always
yeah,
seemed to be on a diet, and I would go on them with her even though I didn't need to lose weight. But whereas now I'm away from all of that, away from the safety, the familiarity of my family and my friends back in Australia, even though it's still 20 years on. Um, but like I said, each time I moved, I'd put on weight. So to me, it's like a comfort thing. But, you know, but how much played into how I am now from, when I was a little kid? That's probably a really good thing for a therapist. And I wonder too, is it something that people, I know a lot of people do go into therapy, and if they're wanting to do this and have had trauma in their either childhood or in their life as an adult, maybe they should be speaking to somebody that
mm,
can deal with all of this and get it out somehow or another, rather than just suppressing it. I think that's a big thing with me. I hate confrontation. My husband's quite hot-headed, and we can argue. So for me, because I can't stand it,
yeah,
I tend to just stuff those feelings down inside me. And often, I'll do that with food. That's
yeah,
my coping mechanism. But recognizing that, and that's what, I mean, God, maybe I'm a slow learner, but recognizing that more and more as I'm doing, I'm hoping that can help me.
Yeah.
I just eating because it's a knee-jerk reaction to something that's been said or an argument we're having, or I'm not happy with my lot in life right now. But
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm always the first person to say, be the victor, not the victim. So
But I think we've probably identified similar triggers in different stories. So we've talked about then, the trigger of confrontation. That's definitely for both of us in slightly different forms, but whether it's something challenging or confrontation, there's the emotion of feeling the mindless eating. So when you were just trying to suppress your feelings about the loss of your mum, or whether, I'm just sort of just turn to my kitchen because I'm there. I think for me, and I don't know about you, one of the things that I haven't sort of identified yet here is the fact that loneliness, actually, I think, so when I, as an adult a few years ago, when I just described feeling pretty low and rubbish about myself and overeating, what I was, even though I was in a relationship, was really lonely. And that was part of the trigger of the overeating. I've got a really, really great friendship circle, and I'm very lucky now as an adult. When I was a young girl, I didn't. I was a very lonely young girl. So I think that probably didn't help my eating then. And for the last 10 years, I've worked on my own pretty much. I've got a team before COVID that we're working together, but not so much now. But I'm at home on my own working as well. So,
right, same here.
It's a sort of a lonely situation.
It is,
and
yeah.
I think if you were in an office, you probably wouldn't be in that same format of just being able to go and get whatever you want,
right,
whenever you want. And actually you just be like, well, I'm bored. You're not bored, you're busy, but you're
right,
bored because you're on your own and that sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of mindless eating that happens then because of loneliness as well.
right.
And so for me, the whole sort of umbrella over all of this that we've just described is it's being used as a tool for something, isn't it?
Right.
So food is being
like
used
a
as a comfort. Yeah, it's exactly like other people use different other forms. So whether it's drugs or alcohol
cigarettes
or any other addiction,
Yeah.
it's something to try and take the edge off, isn't it?
Yeah.
And actually what we're doing is instead of having a cigarette, we're having something to eat.
Right.
Both of us are harming, both of them are harming ourselves, our
Right.
bodies. Cigarettes, we know the harm it does. Really, overeating is also doing a huge amount of harm because of heart health, diabetes,
Yeah.
blood pressure, joints, all of it.
Yes.
We are harming ourselves,
Yeah.
probably in equal measure, really, than smoking or drinking an excessive amount of alcohol. And that's why we've got to deal with it like that. So if someone said to me, are you going to take up smoking? I wouldn't dream of it.
Right.
Because I'm so scared of the damage that it could do. Because as a young girl, I saw the damage because I lost 2 grandparents to it.
Right.
If someone said to me, do you ever see yourself as being alcoholic? I'd be absolutely not, because it's just not something that I have an issue with controlling. And I also want to be able to drive. I drive a lot during the day and, all of those sorts of things. So that would never be an issue. If someone says to me, do you want to eat as much as you can? I'm like, yeah, okay. Because it just doesn't, just doesn't bring it on. Where do I start? And so each one of those things is that issue for you to deal with. But it's the same process that the drug, whatever that may be,
like addiction. Yeah.
And so it's then as the controlled adult is to learn to control the triggers. So actually, it's not the food's fault. It's not the drug's fault. It's not the alcohol's fault. It's how you use them, isn't it?
Right.
And so then it's up to us to then control the triggers. So that's when we then go back to this emotional, the emotional situation. So you're right, maybe we have to do some work on what happened when we were younger or what's happening now we're older and all of these sorts of things. But the only thing you can do is recognize the trigger when it happens.
Right. And know that you are in control. Even though you might not feel like it, you are. You have control over that. You don't have control over someone being an asshole, but you have control over how you react to it. So, you have control. You don't have to put it in your mouth. It's about just give it 5 minutes, even if we could do that. I bet to walk away from something and then get on with whatever, washing, working out, whatever it is that you're doing. I bet, you probably wouldn't come back to it.
No.
Or you just forget about it.
Yeah.
I've done that. So that's like goals for next week, because we like to set a goal for next week. So I know that's definitely going to be mine. I'm going to be sort of more in the moment when I'm eating, like a day-to-day type thing. I mean, I like to plan. We do that with our meals, but instead of thinking, I just if I'm feel like I need to just binge out on something, I'm just going to stop and think, why am I doing this? What's going on, Lovoni? Why, So stop, know that I'm in control. I tell myself that, even though I might not believe it, I have to, fake it till I make it. I just tell myself I've got this because, really at the end of the day you do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that I deserve it. I deserve to feel healthier and feel better. So that's my goal.
My version, I'm going to do the living like someone that has already got this control. So
right, yes.
So that's the same thing, but that's how I'm going to do it.
Yeah,
what decision would they be making right now?
Right.
So I'm going to do that decision and just try to live that life, the fake it, but actually start to do it. So not just imagining it, actually live their life.
Right.
So that's what that's my goal for this week.
Because how, to stop and think, how is this going to serve me?
Yeah.
That's one way of looking at it. So what are you cooking, Sarah? You have any ideas for what you're cooking coming up here? Because I always like to know what everybody's cooking.
I haven't got any plans for this week. My son's away this weekend because he goes to stay with his dad every other weekend.
Right.
So no major plans this week. But what I am going to do is I'm going to start to make some meal plans and then sort of actually scope out the week ahead. And I'm going to definitely. I had something this week. I did a satay chicken and I did some cabbage and some carrots and sort of sauteed them with some garlic, salt and stuff. It was absolutely delicious.
Sounds yummy.
So I think I'm going to do more of that. I really enjoyed that as the vegetable base of things.
Right.
So I think I'm going to do a lot more of that, I think, this week.
I made the tagine that you were talking about from BBC Food.
Yeah.
I made that yesterday. I actually shot it and I'm going to put it on my website today. It's delicious. And it made, good because it's just the two of us. So I've got some containers. I made couscous to go with it. Put it into some containers and popped it in the freezer. But that was really good. I put apricots in it instead of the raisins.
The sultanas, yeah.
This week.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll share that on our. People won't know, but we've got our Instagram profile is now all set up and running.
Right, and I'll put the link to that under this episode as well as the link to that, the link to the recipe. I'll do that when I get it up and going.
Okay.
And yeah, I think cool. What else? And any other links? There's I leave the link to Sarah's website. Sarah's got some beautiful stuff on her website that she has illustrated and then it's put onto fine burnt china. It's really lovely. And then I've got some recipes on mine.
Yeah, so if you go to the Waiting Room Podcast Instagram profile, you'll find not only the recipes and links there, but you'll find the Fresh Hunger, which is yours, Lovoni, your site that you can go and take a look, and then mine, which is on there, which is the Dragonfly and Blossom profile as well. So we're posting inspirational tips for you. We're posting images of things that we might have been doing during the day on our stories and the recipes that are linked to Lovoni's site. So there's lots there to have a look at.
And apart from doing lots of Mexican recipes, I'm going to be making a crispy goat cheese salad with some roasted beets and some blood oranges, which in one of the stores here yesterday, when we got them, they called them raspberry oranges. Maybe it's just they look like blood oranges. I'm going to cut into one, but I think maybe it's just a bit of a different marketing. Maybe the whole blood orange thing wasn't selling.
Maybe.
Yeah. But I'm going to try that, and I'm going to do a roasted, like a skillet roasted lemon chicken, just using some drumsticks because they're quite inexpensive, and serve that with some polenta and then probably a salad. So that's a couple of things I'm going to be making, and my biscotti, my chocolate ginger biscotti.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to concentrate on some more vegetarian meals this week.
Right, right.
I really fancy that. So sometimes we do that. We just have a sort of a week or so where we really focus on sort of vegetarian meals. So I've done, and I've shared with you before, the sort of spiced cauliflower that's
Oh,
then
the
roasted.
tacos.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really delicious
Yeah,
cauliflower
that sounds
tacos.
so good.
So probably things like that this week for me. So the
Right.
cabbage, the cauliflower, vegetarian, always very tasty, very spicy. That's going to be my week ahead.
I reckon after doing this cookbook, I'm going to become a bloody vegetarian because there's so much meat.
Really?
Oh my goodness, this author uses just so much meat. I'm hoping that the last batch of recipes, which will be, and then I'll be done after this one. Not after this batch, sadly, then there's one more batch. But I'm hoping that they're going to be side dishes and vegetarian things.
Yeah.
And things with, beans, with legumes and stuff, because I haven't seen a lot of that. But, yeah, lots of
Here's
meat.
hoping.
Lots and lots of meat. And I love veggies. And I think to do switch it up and have some vegetarian, meals is just, I don't know, it's just a good way of getting, one, I think it's inexpensive, and it's just a good way of getting more veg in the diet too.
It's just nice sometimes.
I think so, yeah. Alrighty, well that's us.
Sound like good goals to me.
Sounds like good goals. So tune in next week when we're going to be talking about routine and what a big difference that can make on the your overall health and working out, how it can help you. So that's bye from us.
See you then. Bye.